All right, so this is part two of the first video dealing with fixing your credit, removing collection accounts and derogatory information from your credit profile. Again, this is part two, so if you haven't watched part one, make sure you look for that. And I'm going to try to finish this video up. So we kind of left off talking about, actually, I can continue to read from here. The debt collector uses subversive words to prevent you from understanding that they purchased your private information in order to force you to contract with them. When an account is charged off, the balance goes to zero, and then it is closed. The liability is no longer on the original creditor's books, and they no longer report on that account. The debt collector purchased the debt. Not really. He really purchases your personal information, which is really an arbitrary new account because they always open up a new account. And there's a reason, because they can't use the same account because the account balance is zero. And not only that, once the creditor charges the account off, the creditor can no longer report on that account. That's why usually if you call them back and give them the original account number, they won't even really discuss that account number with you. And because again, they're not supposed to report on that account. So the debt collector purchases your information, opens up a new account, and tries to force you to contract with him. So now think about this. Think about what kind of position that puts you in, because if you call the debt collector and you ask him to validate the debt, now this is key, think closely about what I'm going to say. If you ask him to validate the debt, you're essentially giving him permission to call an original creditor, and I'm not going to necessarily say to call, but to check with the original creditor on an account that the original creditor is no longer reporting on. But because you've given him a request, you've given the debt collector a request to validate, that same request is also authorizing him to go receive a report. So I know, so let me try to break that down a little bit further. It's like, say you go into the bank and you say, is anybody going into my bank account here? And the bank teller tells you, no, we're not going into your account. But when you ask him to make a withdrawal, the same request is also authorizing the authority to go into the account. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm essentially saying is, an original creditor who's charged off an account is not reporting to anybody on that account because they don't have the authority to do so. But remember, part of that account has your information in it. And if you give someone the authority to do something, they can do it. So a part of asking for validation authorized them to make a report on an account that they otherwise do not have the authority or the lawful ability to report on. Because once it's charged off, that is off of their books and they can no longer report on that account. The information is still there. So that's important. This is the same with the Equifax, TransUnion, or Experian. A debt collector cannot speak with someone else in regards to your confidential information, or even a reporting agency. They can. But when you make a formal request for validation, just as the example I gave you with the bank account, the request is in essence the authorization. Because, remember, verification and validation only has to deal with confirming confirming from a third party. So they don't have any obligation to speak to a third party regarding your account pursuant to the FDCPA. But when you ask for debt validation, you are essentially creating that authority. And then, of course, what typically happens is you say, well, will you validate this debt? And they say, we'll validate the debt for you. Then they call a third party. They don't really care who they call or who they speak to, because that person's going to look into whatever and say yes. And then they're going to get that validation from the third party, and then they're going to come back and say, it's confirmed. They performed the duty that you've authorized them to do. So what do in this predicament? Well, I'm going to tell you what you do. This is what's most important about what I'm going to say. First off, be careful who and under what circumstances you ask one to validate a debt. So be careful who you ask to validate a debt, and never ever, let me let this plane fly over right quick. Never ever ask for verification or validation of a debt without being specific and defining the terms of validation. Because remember, they don't have any authority until you give them the authority to do so. So make sure you don't grant them blanket authority to validate so that they can just go speak to somebody. Because if you do that, they'll always validate it. And why is that? Because the term validation is defined under the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, and it's not something that's going to help you. It's just very generic, basic information. Know the date of the account, who the original creditor was, the balance, and just some simple stuff that's not the type of validation or the verification that we desire, right? So what that means is this: if you ask for validation and you don't define what the terms of validation are, then you leave it up to the default, and the default is what's written in the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. So in our letters, when we demand for validation and verification and proof of claim, we also outline the criteria of what constitutes validation. So we define what the term is, and now we've restricted the authority and we've restricted what they can do. So now they can't just give us some type of validation that they can always do. We've given them something that's going to require another party, a third party, to come in and declare under penalty of perjury that the information they're reporting or alleging to be true is true. And that's the part that's not going to happen, which is how we're going to default them every single time and get our effective remedy. So that's in the formal request for debt validation letter that I also put in here. Now, you'll have to read through this PDF. You'll click it. You'll be able to download the template, and you can use it for yourself. It's an excellent template. It does work. Now, again, mind you, if you're not in the premium subscription group, which is $16 a month, you'll only be able to view the PDF, and you won't be able to copy the information off the PDF and paste it into a file. You will have to retype it, obviously, because you have more time than money. Because if you have $16 a month, then please subscribe to the premium subscription group, and you'll have an editable Word document template so you can just plug your information in that validation letter. So far to this point, we've kind of discussed 2 points of which you can have the negative information removed. One is you send that initial letter to the CFO informing him of the violations of the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act that his employees are making, which is, it doesn't require him to move it, but it's just more pressure on him that, hey, I don't want to go back and forth with this guy. And then the next point is actually sending a formal request for debt validation and a dispute letter, which I do them both. See, and let me read this too. Disputing versus validation, from my understanding. Asking for validation is basically a form of disputing the debt altogether. Basically saying that it's not even valid. I want to see any proof that this account exists, that I ever willingly, knowingly, or intentionally created this account. I'm unaware, prove it to me. And that's what definitely I always ask for validation with these debt collector accounts, because I know that although they don't like to admit it, they are brand new accounts and they use my information to open these accounts without my consent, and that's identity theft. So I ask for validation with them also. Validation is kind of like challenging the allegation. It's kind of like challenging the allegation that the original account ever existed. Say, for example, if you were a victim of identity theft and someone used your information to open an account completely without your knowledge, you would naturally request that the debt collector validate their information because you know it was incorrect. So kind of look at validation like that. Disputing, on the other hand, presumes the account is valid but challenges certain aspects of the debt, such as the amount, the credit limit, the timeliness of payments. In some instances, it may be necessary to only dispute the information without requiring validation. But for the purpose of this lecture, we're talking about removing these accounts. So in this instance, you want to validate and dispute. If you're just trying to correct negative information so it could reflect positively and increase your score in regard to certain accounts, then you may just want to dispute certain items of the account. And we have template letters for that too, but that is going to be coming in a future lecture. But in the meantime, you can download those letters if you already kind of understand everything we're discussing in here. Okay, so in here I provide a debt validation letter. You should send that letter to the debt collector and provide a copy. So here's the thing. Now listen closely what I'm going to say. So you send the request for debt validation to the debt collector, right? Now you can also dispute these things directly with the credit reporting agency, but there's a reason why I don't do it that way, and I'm going to explain that to you. I do, but not the way that most people do it, because I send two letters. Say it's ABC Collection Company as a third-party debt collector trying to collect on a collection account. I send him the request for validation, and then I send notice to the credit reporting agencies, which is Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. I send them notice that the debt is being validated, or the debt, that a letter has been sent for debt validation, and that the debt is in dispute, and that I've demanded proof of claim. I only give them notice of that. What I do not do is I do not ask the credit reporting agency to validate the debt. Why? Because once again, as I told you, all they're doing is reporting. They don't have any permission to speak to any third party regarding the information or your personal confidential information or any of the accounts. But the mere act of asking them to validate the debt gives them the authority to call some third party that's going to go in there and say, yes, it's valid. So the reason I don't ask the Equifax, TransUnion, Experian reporting agencies to validate the debt is because I already know that I know what their requirements are under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So I don't necessarily need for them to validate a debt in order to get them to remove it off their account. All I got to do is be able to prove to them that I've requested debt validation with the reporter, with the person that's reporting the information, and that they defaulted. And that right there is enough under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to require those credit agencies to remove that derogatory information. So let me explain something here too. When I speak of the Fair Credit Reporting Act as opposed to the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, there's a little overlap with both of them, but the Fair Credit Reporting Act is going to give you more information of what Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian are required to do. And the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act is going to be your pretty much your ammunition when dealing with the debt collectors. So kind of keep that in mind, and now you see the difference. So that's why your letters are going to kind of be different depending upon whether you're dealing with the debt collector or whether you're dealing with TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. Now, I'm not going to go over the debt validation letter, but I'm going to read the letter that I actually send to the credit reporting agency, which you go to Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, or something like that. Let's see here. Okay, so it says it's to Equifax, and I send this certified mail, and in that certified mail there's an enclosure, and the enclosure is the original demand for validation and proof of claim that I sent to the debt collecting agency. And here's what it says. It says, notice of dispute. The above mentioned account has been disputed with ABC Banking Company. For your record, please find the enclosed notice of dispute, demand for validation, and the request regarding authentic statement of account. Don't worry about that. We didn't discuss that yet. Should ABC Bank ignore or fail to respond, then the enclosed document shall establish irrefutable facts for the record regarding the status of account number whatever. In the event ABC Bank fails or is unable to validate, verify, or provide proof of its claims, you will be required to remove or correct the information according to the record pursuant to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, Section 623A 1B, Section 623B2, and I put another section down there. So I'm basically saying if this other if this person that's reporting this information to you goes in default, you will be required to remove this information. And I'm CCing them on the process, and they'll also be CC'd on the default. This notice does not grant permission or authority to Equifax, TransUnion, or Experian to use, share, or discuss any of my personal information with any third party. So I'm basically also letting them know I'm not requesting that you validate this debt. Or another way of saying is I'm not giving you permission to check with some third party so that you can confirm this debt for your records. I'm letting you know that I've already taken care of that. Because remember, asking for a dispute is giving them the authorization to verify something that they otherwise don't have the authority to do. Anyway, notice to agent is notice to principal, notice to principals, notice to agent, etc. Let's see. Okay, so let's analyze what we have done. Assuming you've taken all the steps and executed the templates in this lesson, including the telephone call to the collection agency, you've sent a letter to the CFO regarding their employees' violations of the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, which is one possible point of having the negative derogatory information removed. Secondly, you provided them with a proper demand for validation and dispute letter according to their obligations under the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. So this is kind of good. By the time the company receives that, they probably already have some notes on your file indicating that you've made the complaint to the CFO. So you've asked them, you've sent them a formal request to validate the debt, and you've disputed all portions of the debt, and you've defined what the terms of validation are. Actually, let's go click on that real quick, because remember, we don't want what constitutes validation. So let me just kind of read through that letter real quick. I'll just read through some of it. This is a notice and demand for validation of debt and dispute. Formal request for validation of debt in accordance with the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act 15 U.S.C. 1692 G, Section 809B. The above referenced account is not acknowledged as valid and validation is requested. In addition to this request for validation, I am disputing the balance owed, the account status, the payment responsibility, the comments, the past due amount, and the date open portions of the alleged debt indicated by the above referenced account. The assertion of my right to dispute this debt should not be construed as verification or validation of the alleged debt. Please provide me with the following. 1. A copy of your original contract giving rise to account number 123456789, under which I accrued the alleged debt of $3,000. If ABC Collection Company is not named as the creditor on the original contract, then please provide me with the name and address of the original creditor, as well as proof of your authority to represent the creditor or consumer in this legal matter. An acceptable form of proof would be 1. A power of attorney or an assignment letter appointing you as assignee for the debt, or a statement sworn to under penalty of perjury that the debt is valid and that you are legally entitled to collect this debt on behalf of the original creditor. See, these are the terms of these are the terms of validation. I'm kind of rushing because this has gone on long enough. Provide me with the name and the official title of the person to whom you verify this information with, their company or their computer-based system used for verification. Please also include the date in which you communicated with that individual or the date by which the system was accessed. All this stuff I'm getting right out the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the things that they're required to do that they're definitely not going to do. As a request of validation, please provide an accounting of any money, property named as collateral, insurance, or services subject to or arising out of the transaction that created this alleged debt obligation. Please inform me of the date when you opened up account number whatever. Please provide a record of any payments or other reductions since the last billing statement for account number whatever. Please inform me as to whether your agency has a debt collection license from the state of whatever state they are, and if not, please explain why. Please provide me the date of your professional license for debt collection, along with the name on the license number, the name, address, and telephone number of the state agency issuing the license, your tax ID number, and your tax ID number on the enclosed W-9. The address of your registered agent, and your business registration number issued by your Secretary of State's office. If you provide the requested documentation, I will require at least 30 days to investigate the information you provide. During this time, you must cease collection activity. Do not report any negative information to the credit bureaus during this validation period. Something like that. Remember, this is a template, so go in here and make it personal and fix any errors that I may have left in there. If your office doesn't respond within 30 days, blah, 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 you got to remove it, etc., etc. So what I wanted you to see is I specifically defined what the terms of validation were, and I didn't leave it blank, because if I left it blank, I would make it too easy for them, and they'll just get a copy of a piece of paper and say, yes, we validated, by meaning we told you the amount, we told you who the original creditor was, we told you the date of the contract, etc., etc. So up to this point, we've spoken, if you've done everything we've discussed, you got the 1 point of having it removed, which is the CFO says, whoa, we have some FDCPA violations here, I don't want to deal with this guy, remove it. The second point is the notice of the formal notice for debt validation. We can't validate the debt. He's asking us for too much. We can't swear to anything under penalty of perjury because we don't really have any first-hand knowledge, so we're going to default. That's the second point of having it removed. Lastly, we gave a notice to the credit agency that the collector received a dispute and a formal request for validation. This constitutes a third point of removal because the credit agency has their own set of requirements enforced by the FTC and the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The credit reporting agency cannot continue to report information when they have reason to know that it is inaccurate. This is why we are involving them as a third party, so that if and when the debt collector goes into default, we can use the letters, the defaults, the certified mail tracking numbers as proof to have the credit reporting agency remove the specific information. Let's see. Okay, your knowledge of what they can and can't do will carry you through any unperceived responses. We did not discuss the presentment default procedures as relates to validation and dispute and debts, but I'm certain that most of the people watching this already understand how to present documents and how to certify non-response, whether by your own affidavit or by using a notary. You can learn more about the presentment default process by, once again, logging into www.thctrust.org and clicking on the link that says Administrative Procedure. And by the way, if everything I'm saying, which I think is simple, but if it's overcomplicated to you and you're really trying to resolve some issues or some items on your credit file, I also do coaching and consulting sessions. And my normal rate is $75 per session, but if you've been with thctrust.org for a while or you're a premium subscriber, in regard to fixing your credit report, maybe I'll give you a little bit of a discount. Just depends on how busy I am at the time. But let's go ahead and finish this up. Here are some quick notes in regards to what debt collectors can do and what they can't do and what they have to do. They must identify themselves and their company. That's 15 USC 1692B or subsection 804 of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, the public law version. They may not use any language or symbol on the mailing envelope in connection with debt collecting. Any of this stuff is a violation of the FDCPA, so make a record of it. They may only communicate with consumers or the consumer's attorney. So because it says they can only communicate with you, what they are not saying but telling you, because the inclusion of one thing is the exclusion of another, is that they can't communicate with anybody else. That's section 804. Let's see. They cannot communicate with any third party, Section 805B. They can't call at odd times. They must cease and desist when told to do so in writing. They can't harass you, threaten you, oppress you, abuse criminal means to harm you. They can't make repeated telephone calls, or engage in different types of conversation to annoy you. They can't intentionally try to annoy you. And again, I cited the reference for everything that I'm saying. You got to go download this file. They can't make a false representation in the amount, the character, the legal status, or threaten to take a legal action that they cannot take, which is going to become very important because remember, if you've been following, we've recently discovered the information that, and this is kind of jumping off the topic a little bit, but when you deal with mortgages, it doesn't create an enforceable right or attachment, which means they don't have any lawful authority to foreclose on real property based off a mortgage deed. So that means the attorney that's representing the bank, that's a debt collector company that's making a threat to foreclose, is directly violating the FDCPA, because he's making he's threatening to take a legal action. He's threatening to take a legal action that he doesn't have the authority to take. Violation of subsection 807 of the public law version, or that's 1692E. 15 USC 1692E. Let's see. He can't make a false representation or implication that the accounts have been turned over to innocent purchasers for value. I don't want to explain that right now because I'm trying to finish this up. There's some other things in here, so read over it. Additionally, what you can do to add more firepower to fixing things on your credit is file a complaint with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau for any violations that the debt collector is making. File a complaint with the FTC. File a complaint with the debt collector's Secretary of State or Attorney General. Let's see. We already spoke about this. I'll say it again. Never request for debt validation without specifying the terms of validation. The mere request for validation grants authority of the validator to act on your behalf. If you do not define the terms of validation, then you assent to the default terms of validation, which only requires them to give you a copy of a contract stating the name and the address of the creditor, the amount of the debt, and other basic information. This is what I term as wiggle room. It's a way to get you, the consumer, to absorb all the liability. Our template letters take everything into consideration that I've mentioned in this video. And now here's for the very, very, very best part of this lecture. I've saved it for last. So I'm going to tell you, with all that I said, you will be successful in removing collection accounts off your credit report. But now I'm going to tell you the easiest way to do it, and it's coming right out of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And I'll read it. The easiest way to remove collection accounts is to complete an affidavit of identity theft. Because pursuant to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, 623, paragraph A, 6B, or 15 USC 1692 F, if a consumer notifies you that he is a victim of identity theft and gives you an identity theft report, you may not furnish this information to a credit reporting agency regarding the fraudulent account or debt. All you have to do is let them know and fill out the report. And somebody is saying, well, but yeah, if I really had this credit card or whatever, remember, they always open up a new account, these collection companies. That's what they do. So if someone opens up a new account number on some date without your signature, without your contract, without your consent, and they use your personal and confidential information to do it, that is the definition of identity theft. So I hope you enjoyed this. Remember, help support us, join the premium subscription group, and you will definitely be entitled to receive the next lessons and the documents that come along with them in regard to fixing your credit. Thank you for watching. Peace.